Hello and welcome to this Women's Informal Network discussion on are bias and discrimination in the 21st century still inevitable? My name is Maria Magdalena Heinrich, and I am one of the coordinators of the Women's Informal Network, together here today also with Citra Deshpande, the founder of the WIN Network, and Tiziana Galloni, our master manager of the database of our more than 800 members. We have grown since 8 March 2016, when Citra and Tiziana started it in IFAD, from 8 to more than 800 members, and we have 88 different organizations represented in our network. So yesterday marked our 6th birthday, our 6th anniversary of WIN. And today we are going to discuss in the context of the International Women's Day, the campaign that has the theme Break the Bias. And so as a first thing, I would like to kindly ask someone if someone could take a screenshot of us all together making the symbol of breaking the bias, which is the theme for International Women's Day this year. Exactly, you're following me, very good. Excellent, I can see nearly. So those who are behind the picture, yes, great, Suzanne, nice to see you. Okay, Laura, and if there are some more that can just go on camera and do this, crossing the hands against bias. And then I would have to probably with my elbow to take the screenshot. If there is someone that we can ask, if someone is volunteering to do this, that would be brilliant.
Let me do it, Marilena. Let me do it.
Yes, Margarita, thank you so much. We will then do a Photoshop for you.
So your hand.
Okay, so 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
Done?
Okay.
Did you get it, Margarita? Yes, brilliant. Thank you so much. So as I was saying, in the context of this year's theme, Break the Bias, we wanted to also touch upon this topic. And the way we are going to do this is by hearing some firsthand experiences of our dear co-authors, best-selling co-authors, Véronique Saint-Luce. Hello, Véronique. She wrote one of the 20 chapters of the book You Matter, How Women Reclaiming Their Power Are Changing the World. The book was published on 12th November 2021, and it stemmed from an idea that originated in one of our dreaming sessions of the Women's Informal Network last year. And then I had the idea of bringing together 20 women, mostly working in the international development sector, to share their stories and to make their biographies and their experiences heard and their voices heard. So today we will hear 2 voices, one of Véronique Saint-Luce and one of Wadzanai Garve, who works in FAO and who is a long-standing WIN member. They will share with us some very personal and intimate experiences with regards to bias and discrimination. And then I have the pleasure of having here with us Catherine Megan. She is the legal counsel of IFAD, and she will share with us some aspects with regards to legal actions that can be taken against bias and discrimination, and then also overall, what is IFAD doing to improve the situation for women in general? And also, I have the pleasure of having here with us Ms. Katia Meluish, our ombudsperson in FAO, and she will actually share with us some of the insights that were emerging from a recently conducted survey on bias and discrimination within FAO. The results have not been shared yet officially, so she will give us some hints about the trends and where we are going towards. And we have also here Monde Magolo, our ethics officer. So we're also keen on hearing from her how things are going with regards to the activities within FAO. But before we start, I wanted to very briefly dive into what is bias and discrimination exactly, right? Because we speak about it, we know that we have to be against it, but how can we be against it? What is it, bias? Bias is basically our inclination for or against something or someone, especially in a way that is considered to be unfair. This involves favorable and unfavorable beliefs or attitudes about a group that determines how we perceive and behave with that group. And bias can develop over time through our everyday experiences. And when we are biased towards a certain thing, it is difficult to make a fair judgment. This is why within our organizations, we really have to try to avoid being biased, especially when we are in a selection process, we're in a panel, in a hiring panel, for example. We all do have bias, okay? And so, but what is the difference between bias versus prejudice? So bias is basically an inclination for or against the person, as I said, an idea or a thing, especially in a way to be considered unfair. But prejudice is a preconceived opinion that is not based on actual experience or on a specific reason. And bias can be both negative, but also positive attitudes. So we can be positively biased towards some group of people or negatively biased, while usually prejudice has a negative connotation only and negative attitudes. And bias basically results in unfairness, and prejudice results in discrimination. So this is more or less, let's say, the differentiation. No? And we all have, as I said, we all have biases. Some are conscious and some are unconscious. So what is conscious bias? Conscious bias is the biased attitudes about a certain group we are aware of. And in conscious bias, we know that we are being biased and we are doing it intentionally. For example, a person prefers to work with men rather than with women, or a person who doesn't like to associate with people of a different culture. These are all prejudices which can discriminate against certain groups of people. And in addition, conscious bias can be easily determined by the ideas and behavior of a person. But then the unconscious bias is unconscious or implicit bias, refers to biased attitudes that operate outside our awareness and control. In other words, you may not be aware that you hold such biased attitudes unconsciously. And here you may be doing something wrong without even realizing that you're doing it. And that's the very tricky part. So this unconscious bias can be in direct contrast to your own beliefs and values that you profess to hold. And they are difficult to determine and can influence your actions and behaviors more than conscious biases. So the dangerous thing is that we don't realize that our behavior has been influenced by this bias. And basically, bias influences our decisions. No? And if we are not conscious about this, then we may take wrong decisions. Okay, so what can we do about it? If it's something that we're doing without knowing it and unconsciously, well, one thing is talking about it. Or assessing your biases. There are several tests, and I will be sharing a very interesting article about the different types of biases that exist and what can be done. There are 9 steps on how to overcome bias. Okay, so you can basically take a self-assessment, a test, and you become aware of the biases that you have. And once you know, then it becomes easier to make informed decisions and to avoid biases. So I would like to hear from you in the chat. what you think bias is, whether you agree with the definition that I just gave, and whether you noticed that you have bias, and whether you were able to overcome some of these biases by actively doing something or, engaging, reading. So it is scientifically shown that our brain and we as humans feel more comfortable, for example, with people who look similar to us, or with things that we know well. We feel more comfortable versus something that we don't know or that is very different from us, okay? So one of the things could be to get to know the other, right? And once you know the other culture or person or strange thing, then you may realize, well, that's actually not so different from me. And then your bias may disappear. I don't want to make something very complicated look very easy, because I don't think it is. And if today in 2022, we're still talking about bias and discrimination, probably it's a big issue, right? So, but without continuing to talk about this in theory, I would like to hand over to Veronique, who, as I said, is one of the co-authors. And this event today marks the first in a series of events that within the Women's Informal Network, we're going to organize throughout 2022 around the various topics that were covered in the You Matter book. We are 20 different women. The age range spans from 18 to 68 years. And so the problems or the topics that we brought up are of a very different nature. And Veronique, in her chapter, in her beautiful chapter, specifically spoke about her experiences with regards to living with bias and also a little bit with discrimination, I would say. Veronique, would you like to share with us some of your experiences and some parts of your beautiful chapter of the You Matter book? Over to you.
Thank you, Marilena. Thanks to all of you for being on that call. I'm not a specialist of discrimination, but as she mentioned, I wrote up, I don't know if you can see. No, you cannot see. I'm holding the book. And in my chapter called The Power of Being Yourself, I mentioned two things that might be interesting to the conversation today. I wrote about resisting labels and boxes, and a bit about embracing my multiple identities. So to start with, I would read a bit of my chapter, if you don't mind. So, why is being a Black woman synonymous with poor education, limited exposure, a survivor from any possible abuse systems who are in need of opportunities and empowerment? Obviously, I'm the wrong candidate, holding the equivalent of a PhD from the most prestigious law university in France, speaking 6 different languages, having traveled extensively, lived and worked on various continents, passionate about art, music, design, architecture, gastronomy, fine wines and spirits. No need for me, or no need for any savior to direct me towards the finish line, to the light at the end of the dark tunnel. I can save myself. No need of a man for important decisions like accepting a new job, purchasing a car, signing for a flat, or raising my child. How can women be called the weaker sex? Have you already considered what archetypes, general categories, preconceived labels and boxes that family, people, society apply to define you? Do you agree with these labels, tags, boxes? Do you feel unfairness? Somehow, all these wrong assumptions made me spend a lot of energy to defy them, which made me stronger, more fiercely independent, autonomous, very well organized, and at the same time, acting like a rebel to establish norms. Definitively, I have become a trained warrior, which was perceived as being the aggressive, angry Black woman. But with time comes wisdom. If I could advise anyone, I would say, don't accept to be put in a predefined boxes or in predefined boxes to be labeled or assumed. Don't let anyone tell you who you are based on how you look or where you come from, etc. However, choose your battles well. Don't waste your time in educating everyone you meet. It is exhausting. And perhaps some people are lost cases, too attached to their preconceptions, afraid to learn that they were wrong, that the world is not what they think it is, or what it was in the past. Meanwhile, more labels, but different ones though, will be associated to you. So don't stay trapped in that spiral. Just start emancipating yourself from these boxes if they don't fit you, if they don't fit you, or help you growing, evolving, and improving in your life. Regarding embracing my multiple identities, I would just read that human beings are divided into a multiple of well thought out and defined categories: skin color, races, gender, sexual orientation, religious, political, or social-cultural opinions, nationalities, languages. And then one day, somewhere in the world, one of these categories suddenly becomes of a paramount importance to a group of people who believes that there is only one correct possible answer. This collective belief will constitute a huge challenge, difficulty, or obstacle for those who think that the box to be fitted in is a bit narrow and who would like to be able to fill out different boxes. What should we do if we belong to the group who needs multiple choice answers? I will stop here because time is scarce, but what I would like to say is those are elements of my life showing that I've been, like many other people, subjected to preconceived ideas, bias, and sometimes discrimination, but I'm interrogating other people who might have been sharing this type of experience. But here today, with this International Women's Day focus on break the biases, stopping discrimination, we need to use this time also to maybe explore what can we do collectively, but also at individual level to stop these biases, to stop that discrimination. And if I reflect out of my mind, I believe that we could reflect on our own biases, because as Maria Magdalena mentioned, all of us, we have some. We have bias on others, on colleagues, on neighbors, on family members, on friends, strangers. Maybe we could make connection with people who are not looking like us, because most of the time it's based on ignorance. We just assume without knowing really. So if we were breaking already this distance and we were closer to the people that we have biases about, it could change our vision. And then I would say also that as UN professionals, we are privileged and we should put ourselves into other people's shoes to slowly become allies and maybe help others to get their voices heard or listened to. We can create the conducive environment or the conducive forum or the event to sensitize, mobilize, or highlight these negative traits preconception, biases. These steps are maybe the first one to break the vicious cycle of discrimination, but all participation individually is crucial to find more solutions, more actions that could be creating a better place for leaving no one behind, as we often say in our documents in the UN. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Veronique, for sharing your story. A round of applause if we were all in the same room, but we can also have a virtual applause for you. Beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you.
The power of being yourself. I think you have it represented very nicely. And for those of you who have not read the chapter yet, I think Veronique also very ironically brought some experiences that she had. And I really encourage everyone to read it. But also, as you're saying, to reach out to the different people. And that we all have to do our part. Thank you so much, Veronique. Very nice. And now I would like to move on to Wodzi. Wodzi Naigarve is an economist in FAO, and she's also co-author. She is so many things. and also a long-standing WIN member. Wodzi has also written her chapter in the book, and it's called The Power of an Intrepid African Girl. Wodzi, would you like to share with us your views on bias and discrimination, please? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Marilena. I apologize for being slightly late. I was chairing the Association of Professionals meeting, the annual assembly. So yes, many things to many people. And yes, let's break the bias, right? And I'm dressed in purple. Thank you very much. I'm going to start with something that's very personal to me about bias. I have been HIV positive for 30 years. This is my 30th year. I was diagnosed in 1992. So I have worked and lived with stigma and bias for a long, long time. And in many ways, it is the silence that kills us, because the silence is what makes people feel the sense of entitlement, the sense of, under the guise of freedom of speech, attacking people who want to speak up about their pain, minimizing people's pain. I don't know how many times I've been told I'm being too sensitive. This is not a racist issue. Oh, you're looking at it through a certain lens. It's not okay to minimize people's pain and to minimize people's experiences. Unless you've walked a day in my shoes, please allow me to air my pain and the way I see things through my lens. And then you can say to me, oh, I didn't know, or this is new to me, or please explain, but please do not minimize. In the book, I also talked about the bias against my gender and my race. I'm an economist, but there have been so many times that just because I'm the only woman in the team, I'm told, oh, you can also do the gender aspects of this thing. I'm not a gender expert. I haven't studied it. Just because I'm a woman doesn't mean it makes me a good gender expert. But, oh, and because you're here, we would be out in the field. Oh, Wodzi can do the cooking. Huh? Who told you I could cook? And who told you that I was here to do the cooking? So, you know, stuff like that. I have a lot of colleagues who have made me their professional work wife, you know, bouncing ideas off me, getting free coaching. So a lot of advantage has been taken just because of my gender. So in the book, I wrote, and I've got the hardcover. I don't know if you can see it. It's so nice. I'm just going to read 2 paragraphs in my book, if you will allow me, on gender and bias. One thing that has been a constant detriment in my career is my gender and my race. Many times I encounter prejudice. Sometimes it is prejudice against me as a woman. The best example of this is when I went to Pakistan, the Azad Jammu Kashmir region. I was the female economist, and there was a female gender specialist and 2 males. The team leader was male. When it came time to present our findings on the project we were designing, which had the goal of increasing the incomes and improving the livelihoods of the women of the Azad, Jammu and Kashmir region, I presented my findings in a hall full of men. The medium of communication was English, but because the culture did not allow men to speak directly to women whom they were not married to, a male colleague was listening to what I said and repeating it verbatim to the group. At one point, my frustration peaked, and I said to the group of men, "Gentlemen, is there any way we can compromise? My presentation will take twice as long as it is meant to, and you will hear the same thing I said regurgitated. As I am from a different continent, different culture, and different religion, could we make an exception?" I took a huge risk because I was going against culture, tradition, and challenging the patriarchy. But fortunately, the leaders agreed to compromise, and I was able to make my presentation without an interpreter. I don't even know if you call a person who interprets English to English an interpreter. And then the second level of prejudice is against my race. Unfortunately, one is not always protected from racism. And I have had situations when people in power have questioned my addition to the team, not based on merit, but based on the color of my skin. The good thing about working in the United Nations system is that they try to mitigate and educate against racism. However, when working in a hostile environment, the stress levels rise. I find myself constantly challenged to prove that I am capable of doing economic and financial analysis. So every assignment feels like a freaking first time. An FFT, as I call it. This expression was coined by Brené Brown, an American researcher and storyteller, when she described creating her podcast during a pandemic. FFT means that one is unsure because it is the first time. So one tests out the environment, has to prove they can adapt and perform in the new environment. One has to learn the language of the space, and it triggers feelings of not being good enough and not being worthy. Approaching each assignment as if it is the first time is stressful. It brings about questions about your competency, and at times I found myself paralyzed by fear. And I can say this as an African, especially just watching the media around Ukraine and watching the Africans being denied entry onto trains just because of the color of their skin. You just become triggered. I became triggered. You fall into this black hole again of what is it about what is it about the color of my skin that makes people so afraid? Our blood is the same. Our desires are the same. All I ever wanted or valued was to have a family, get my kids through school, live a good life, be a good servant leader. And yet, at every turn, just because of the color of my skin, I find myself having to educate people about what it means to be an African woman. It is exhausting, can I just say? I get so tired. It is not my job to fix people's ignorance. There's a lot of literature out there about racism, bias, and all sorts of things, prejudice. And could I just say to people, before you make a statement, before you open your mouth, and to all the Caucasians, please, one statement I'm going to say, please do not say, "I do not see color." That is just such a, it minimizes everything. Everybody sees color because that is the nature of our existence. So please don't say to me, oh, Adzi, you know, I don't see color. Yes, you do see color. And it's okay to see color. But do not minimize my experience as a person of color. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Watsi, and a round of applause for you for being so passionate and so enthusiastic about sharing your experiences, also very hurting experiences and tiring, exhausting, like you said. It must be really difficult to always have to prove oneself at every corner. So thank you so much. Now, I would like to move on to Katja Meluish, our ombudsperson in FAO. And you are going to share with us some of the emerging trends or information that came out of the recently conducted survey about bias and discrimination. Katja, over to you.
Thank you, thank you. So first of all, I just wanted to mention a couple of things that I'm sure that you're all very well aware of. But just to remind everybody that under our UN rules and the standards of conduct of the International Civil Service, we're expected to respect the dignity and worth and equality of all people. And we are to avoid assumptions based on stereotypes. And of course, one of the main tenets of the UN Charter is the equality of men and women. And our organizations should therefore do their utmost to promote gender equality. I'm sort of paraphrasing there from the International Civil Service standards of conduct. But the basic point here is that freedom from discrimination is a human right, and our UN system organizations prohibit discrimination or harassment, including sexual and gender harassment and abuse in any form in the workplace. And that's the starting point that we should, and I'm sure you are all aware of it, but we should remind ourselves. And it seems so obvious, and you know, in an international organization, we expect diversity to be fundamental and that everybody is tolerant naturally of people from different cultures and backgrounds and races and nations. And we relish, or we should relish, the fact that our colleagues are from all corners of the globe. And yet we see time and time and again inappropriate behavior, we see discrimination, we see gender bias. And as an ombudsman, I have obviously a lot of visitors who come to me raising these very troubling issues almost every day. And we have, I mean, I've been asked to talk about surveys. We've done surveys. We have recently conducted a survey on racism and race discrimination within FAO. And we're going to, I think there's going to be a follow-up to that, a more detailed survey coming out soon from the Joint Inspection Unit, which will probably come to all UN system organizations on the same area. We've had in FAO employee satisfaction surveys that have touched on inclusion and diversity issues. And so we've heard obviously feedback from staff and personnel around the world on these issues. And while I can't today go into the detail of the racism survey that we did at FAO recently, because it's not, as I say, yet been published, that the outcome of that will be discussed soon. And we'll see the same sort of trends that we've seen in our organization, and I think across the board in the UN, that although thankfully the majority of staff do not experience harassment, they claim not to have experienced discrimination, there is a troubling percentage, varying usually between about 17 and 25% of staff who say they have either experienced these things themselves or have witnessed others experiencing them. And what is most troubling, I think, is that of that, so let's say sort of 20-odd% who've experienced these things, the vast majority do not report those incidents. They just feel that they are either going to be retaliated against or there is absolutely no point in reporting because nothing is going to be done. And this, I think, is the most troubling reality that we live with. There is also, I think, in FAO certainly, and this may be true across other organizations, a lack of awareness about how to go about making formal complaints. And I think we can all use whatever knowledge we have and means we have to try to spread the word, to spread the awareness of how to report. Because I think that the most important thing that anyone facing or witnessing these kinds of bias and discrimination can do is to speak up. We need to keep on championing the rights of women and fighting discrimination on the grounds of race or for any reason. And we need to continue to strive to build the sort of fair workplaces that our organizations say that they aspire to be. But I wanted to mention a few positive developments that have happened, let's say, over the past couple of years at FAO. We've obviously, by conducting these surveys, we're getting some answers back that we can use to try to generate new actions that will help to discourage discrimination in the first place, but then also to counter it once it's been raised. And some of the things that have happened, let me just summarize very briefly. I know that time is short, but at FAO, for example, we have published, with the help of Mondi's office, the ethics office, a roadmap guiding staff as to where to go when they have various issues, but obviously this would include harassment, sexual harassment, discrimination on whatever grounds. The ethics office has also published a code of conduct, again, our own within FAO. It's based broadly on the standards of the International Civil Service, but it's been adapted to our workforce and workplace, and it helps to clarify how everyone is expected to behave. And it's a very helpful resource for anyone who's unsure whether their own or someone else's conduct is inappropriate. There's been like this WIN committee, which is an excellent, relatively new development in the last 6 years, and congratulations on that. There's been more recently, during the pandemic or just before the pandemic, a women's committee that was launched within FAO, and I think it's been a fairly successful committee, and it consists of FAO female staff from across the organization. And one of the things I particularly like, I think, that was spearheaded through that committee is a mentorship program, which has been created to support fruitful relationship building across the organization, the sharing of ideas and experiences and career goals. And I think that's a really excellent thing for anybody within FAO to participate in, either as a mentor or as a mentee, to share those experiences and help to help other women to flourish as they deserve to. There's also a new all-encompassing harassment and discrimination policy, which is being worked on at the moment. It's not out yet, but within FAO, I think it's important, as I mentioned, the lack of knowledge about how to complain about matters. I noticed that the term discrimination, for example, doesn't feature in any of the manual at the moment. And so it's difficult for victims of discrimination to know exactly where to go. It does in fact fall within the harassment policy, but it's not specifically set out there. So this new policy, when it comes out, will hopefully define much more clearly what is encompassed by the overall policy, that it includes gender discrimination, race discrimination, and harassment, sexual harassment, abuse of authority, all of these things that are prohibited, and will set out exactly what a complainant should do in order to make sure that their complaints are heard. But one of the troubling things, as I mentioned already, is that when people complain through formal channels, they often find that their complaint is dismissed. And I don't want to cast aspersions on the investigative bodies that try to look into these matters and maybe decide that they can't go any further, but I think it's very difficult in the workplace often to prove that a particular action is caused by a bias or a discrimination. It's a really, really tough thing to show. And therefore, I think it's extremely important that informal methods such as an ombuds office is used as much as possible to try to find informal ways to raise these issues and try to resolve them. I can't say yet that I have a clear and sort of straightforward way of dealing with such cases. I think dialogue is really important. Raising these matters is important. So first of all, going to somebody like an ombudsman and telling the story, and then giving permission to the ombudsperson to take it further, to raise it with higher management. In FAO, I have access to the Director General, and I have raised the issue particularly of gender bias, which I've observed from a number of cases that have come to me. And I think that the only thing that we can concretely do is to keep on raising these matters and to tell everybody, so that it becomes harder and harder for people to hide and harder for people to avoid as an issue. So I'm running out of time, so I'd just like to again stress that I as ombudsperson, but also in any other organizations that are represented here, if there are ombuds people or there are staff representative bodies, ethics officers, even HR, or a manager that you can trust, it's really important to go to those individuals and raise your voices. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katja, for sharing your insights. And you are in the organization not that long, but you have jumped right into it during the pandemic. And I'm sure that you have already seen a lot of these cases. Monde, would you like to add anything from the ethics office perspective to what Katja just shared?
Thank you so much, Marilena. I think mine would be, a very short intervention. I think Katja has covered all the key aspects very well around what we are striving to do in FAO. And from an ethics office perspective, irrespective of the outcome of the racism survey and the actions that would follow, our drive for the last 2 years has really been around trying to raise awareness, what is appropriate and acceptable conduct in the organization. And we are doing this through different means. We've obviously tried to be very, innovative around how we reach out to colleagues, other than the traditional methods of training and raising awareness that we all know. We are trying as much as possible to also leverage on digital technology. But that said, I think, indeed, I do agree with Katja that we've still got a long way to go around, instilling confidence in colleagues to report matters, to come forward and report. And I think as an organization, it's everyone's responsibility to play a role in ensuring that the processes available, whether informal or formal, are seen to be working. And in our awareness raising, for instance, and training, we always strive to implore on managers and supervisors to ensure that they have open door policies that ensure that employees can come forth to them and speak about matters. It is not always, as Katja has put, that matters may reach the formal level of misconduct requiring an investigation. Sometimes matters can be resolved within the team, and perpetrators of vices can be called out by those that are managers, their supervisors, to help put a stop to it and nip issues in early on before they escalate to big issues. So I think we can only continue to raise awareness and talk about these things. I think that's the only way we can draw attention to them. Thank you, Marilena.
Thank you so much, Monde. And I think, your message resonates also with what Wadzi was saying, that silence is what kills us, right? So we do all have to speak up when there is an issue, and hope that through your ethics office, through the ombudsman, we can, through informal ways and formal ways, try to improve the situation. Let's have a look now with Catherine Megan. Associate Vice President and Legal Counsel of IFAD. What can be done from a legal perspective, and what is happening in IFAD with regards to improving the situation against bias and discrimination? Katie, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Marilena. And I just want to start with a shout out to the WIN founders and all the WIN members, because it's a really inspiring thing what you have done, you know, creating this chapter, celebrating 6 years of anniversary. And I also want to give a special shout out to our male colleagues who are with us tonight. I see Pier Francesco, Jeff, Pauni, there may be others. I think it's so important that we have men and women come together to talk about bias and discrimination, to work together, to really uphold the values that we see as UN, you know, and international civil servants. So it's great and inspiring to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I think that, you know, Katia and Monde have really said it very well. I would just add very briefly from the IFAD perspective that I'm really proud that in December of last year, the IFAD Executive Board approved our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. So it's a very broad, far-reaching strategy that looks across many of these issues to say how in our workplace can we work together to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it includes things including raising awareness around unconscious bias, just like you were talking about, you know, Veronique and Wednesday, many of your stories really resonated with me. Listening to concerns. Listening is often the first step, as you said. Proactively creating an inclusive culture in the workplace. And then we also have KPIs, really setting and measuring diversity and inclusion goals. Tricky to get KPIs, but we have gotten some benchmarking with other IFIs and UN entities, because I think one thing, you know, we've learned is what gets measured gets done. And we really want to have an inclusive workplace culture, avoiding, you know, bias and discrimination. So that's just a little bit about what IFAD's been working on. I thought it's also important to celebrate tonight, to celebrate IWD and what we all are doing in our respective mandates, to not just within our own workplaces, but in our mandates, you know, for the people who are the most vulnerable, to support them and break down bias and discrimination. And so I was thinking about this, particularly reflecting on the work IFAD's doing with FAO, IDLO, UNIDWA, and many others around climate justice and gender. And so that's what I wanted to just mention, you know, very briefly. And then Pauni kindly found a great 4-minute video that I'm going to ask him to show, just as a bit of inspiration for how we all in our daily work are working to support those who are most vulnerable. And as we know, climate crisis, when there's a climate crisis, it affects those who are most marginalized. We're seeing the same thing with the very tragic events unfolding with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We see the humanitarian crisis, but we also see the burgeoning food crisis that's coming out of that. Last Monday, there was a report released. It was the IPCC climate report, and the UN Secretary General called it the Atlas of Human Suffering, and really focused on climate justice. And I find that's a really interesting topic. It's something we're working on with many of your agencies, also with IDLO. Climate justice, what does it mean? It really means kind of, instead of looking at kind of the climate crisis just from an environmental lens, to look at it from a legal lens, an ethical lens, and a political lens. So let's give an example of Africa. So no place on the planet will be spared the impact of the climate crisis, right? We're all having a warming planet. But the fact of the matter is that those that contribute the least to the problem will likely be the hardest hit. So specifically, the IPCC climate report notes that as a whole continent, Africa contributes less than 3% of global carbon emissions. However, they will likely experience as a continent half of the climate-related death from illness and extreme heat. And that's really the impact of looking at this with a different lens of climate justice. And from the gender lens, I wanted to note, three things that show that the climate crisis disproportionately affects women and what our institutions are doing to try to remedy this. One, we know that crises in general, like the COVID crisis, can disproportionately affect women who might be more displaced by disasters and have increased risk of violence, gender-based violence, trafficking. They have more responsibilities, like in the COVID crisis, for caring for children, the elderly, et cetera. Second, there's cultural norms and barriers that mean that they might be less involved in decisions for how to prevent, mitigate, or cope with climate change. And third, the fact of the matter is that women do most of the subsistence farming in poor countries. Women produce almost half of the world's food, but in terms of legal right to own land, they own less than 15% of the land. And this is a real kind of effect, I think, of the discrimination. We have a window of opportunity. I am an optimist. The world is heating, but we have a window of opportunity to do something. That window of opportunity is right now. It's this decade, the 2020s, because scientists expect that the damage can be irreversible with about a 1.5 Celsius temperature increase, and that will likely hit that in about 10 years. So I think that, action can be taken. We're all working together to take this action now. And so I just wanted to share with you, in addition to what I found to be the very courageous and inspirational personal stories that Veronique and Wazde shared with us, kind of an inspirational story about how we in our work are working to combat discrimination and bias in legal rights for people, particularly women, so that they can have more right to title to land, which is something that you've heard they have only 15% of title to land. That type of legal discrimination is something that affects them in so many ways in their lives, like what I've just talked about. And I wanted to show this video, which takes place in Bangladesh. It also combines the effects of climate and gender justice on to show how the burdens on women are increasing and discriminatory effects might be increasing. And it takes place on char land, which is basically land that is built up by accretion of sediment around lakes or streams, et cetera, and can be exacerbated by the climate crisis. So Pauni, if you don't mind just sharing the 4-minute video very briefly. I think that really it summarizes and can make us hopeful for the impacts of our work together on legal rights to land in our projects and our work for women in vulnerable communities to break gender bias and discrimination.
Every year in Bangladesh, 26,000 families lose their homes, land and livelihoods to erosion. Aisha Begum is one of them. Her family lost everything when the river washed away their land in 2001.
The problem was erosion from the river. We had no home, nowhere to go.
Aisha is one of 155,000 people who live on low-lying river islands in southeast Bangladesh. Known as chars, these islands are naturally formed from layers of silt carried in rivers flowing to the Bay of Bengal. Regular flooding and rising sea levels are continuously changing the coastline, creating new chars and eroding and submerging others. Aisha's family resettled on a newly formed char, and money was illegally extorted from them to occupy a plot of land.
The salinity of the water was very high, so we couldn't drink it. There were no wells, no ponds. Life was very difficult for us, too challenging.
There was also another difficulty. They faced an uncertain future, rebuilding their lives on land which they did not own. But then, 6 years ago, she and her family joined an ambitious and wide-ranging project, involving 6 different government agencies, 4 NGOs, and with funding from the International Fund for Agricultural Development and the Government of Netherlands. This project helped them gain rights to the land and the skills and finances to develop it. With training in fisheries, crop cultivation and cattle rearing, as well as access to microfinance loans, Aisha's family were able to start investing in their farming and livestock. But these investments were at risk, while this reclaimed land remained vulnerable to floods and erosion, so major investments were made to protect it from disasters, such as the building of raised roads, embankments, drainage canals, and forest plantations. Meanwhile, the land was not only being secured physically, but also legally. Surveys were carried out to chart each plot, and legal hearings were held to assign land rights to new dwellers who possessed no land. So far, 11,000 families have received their land titles, giving them an incentive to increase their own investments.
When they got the land, they feel that that is our own land. So they will have to do something for the development of their households, their families, and also to explore the potentialities of the land.
And 4 months ago, Ayesha's family received their official certificate, entitling them to full ownership of their land.
Now we have received title to the land. Now we have security.
Today, another 400 people are being presented with their land title certificates. Among them are Rima Akhtar and family, who were displaced 16 years ago. This legal document certifies that the land they occupy now belongs to both wife and husband in equal shares. And for the first time, many women have land rights.
I'm very happy that my name came first.
It has been a struggle for Rima and her husband to rebuild their lives, and they are now expecting a second child. Owning their own land, Rima says, gives them security for the future.
I am happy and delighted that our children will own this land. Their future is secured.
While 28,000 families have been helped to build new, more secure lives here, by 2050, 35 million people in the country's coastal areas are estimated to be at risk from rising sea levels. According to one of the project designers and evaluators, this kind of project can be expanded to help these vulnerable communities.
This holistic approach with interventions across a wide range of different sectors is a model for development of coastal communities and help them avoid the risks that could come about from climate change.
And now the government is planning to use this model and replicate it in other coastal chart areas, so they can help the millions of families who are at risk to adapt to a changing climate, secure their land, and build sustainable livelihoods.
So that was it. I just wanted to kind of reflect, on the work we're doing in our workplaces, but also to be proud of the work that we're all doing under the missions of each of our agencies throughout the UN system to break the bias in supporting some of the most vulnerable people in the world. So thanks very much, and back to you, Marilena.
Thank you, Katie, so much for sharing what you, your team, together with other organizations are doing. It is so important that we look, and I like the fact that we looked at first the intimate stories of Veronique and Watsi, and then overall what's happening in the world globally in terms of supporting women. Now, I would really like to open the floor to any comments or questions that you may have for the participants. And I can see Vera, you would like to break the ice. Thank you so much for being here. Vera, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Magdalena. You've seen me probably active on the chat. I want to first apologize to everyone. I have to go pick up my daughter in 10 minutes, so I don't have too much time. But this is really helpful. So I just wanted to reflect on a couple of things. First, I'll just say a little bit of my context. I'm a senior manager at FAO. So I'm now in a position to, sadly, not only often experience gender bias, but also see it happening. So while my skin has gotten pretty thick in the experiencing it side, seeing it happen and feeling like I must do all I can to help with reducing that and reducing discrimination is really something that keeps me up at night. It's very frustrating. It's kind of a lonely place to be when you're trying to fight that battle. So I wanted to reflect on some of the things that some of the good speakers said that really resonated with me. One is on the importance of information. And Katya, I'm really excited to hear about the survey. And you saw in the chat, I put a comment in that we really need to work on getting that data out more than, a seminar and a PowerPoint, because I think I talked to so many colleagues where they still do not see the problem. And I think numbers showing that, yes, it is a problem, repeated over and over and over again, beyond generalities, is going to help, I hope. The other comment that Katya also made that I want to share that relates to my point about it's a lonely world in fighting this battle is that I think my biggest hope at the moment is on the informal channels. And I'm sorry, and some of you that have worked with me in some of these issues know that I do come to this with a little bit of a not a very optimistic perspective, because I'm just not seeing organizations ready to really do something about this. So I think it's up to us, to a community of people that really believes in this issue, to support each other as best we can in fighting that battle. And that is across levels in the organization. You know, it doesn't mean that because you're a senior manager, you only need senior managers to support you. It really needs to have to come from a wide variety of people. And as someone has pointed out, the diversity in gender, meaning that support from men and women, is critical. At the moment, I experience most of it from women, and that's fantastic. I do have some men allies, but they're few and far between. So yes, kudos to those that are here. There are men. I think it's really critical to hear those perspectives and to hear that way of thinking and all that. The other thing to just kind of note, and I don't really have a solution for this, is that I put this in the chat. On the reporting side, we can say all we want. Oh, we need to get people to report. We need to get people to understand. Fully agree on all that. But an issue that we have is that even in the reporting of it all, at different levels, whether you're a senior manager or not, you're still grappling with gender bias. Meaning, oh, you're just being sensitive. Oh, you're a woman. Oh, that person doesn't have thick skin. So, you know, that is a huge problem. So, you know, I don't want to take up, I will end here. I'm sorry, I'm really impassionate sort of few words. I feel like hopefully this is Chatham House rules and we can all exchange. And I definitely look forward to being in touch with many of you, you know, outside of this, because as I said, I think the informal channels is what's going to really help us get there. And we should not underestimate the power of that. Thank you. And thank you really for organizing such a great seminar. And I apologize if I have to leave in a few minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vera, for your participation and also for sharing your firsthand experience as a senior manager. I think it is important that we stick together at all levels, as you're saying, and we support each other formally and informally. And I can see that Wodzi has raised her hand in a reaction, and then we have Chitra. So Wodzi first.
Can I just ask, Marilena, should we stop the recording so we keep it very frank and candid at this point?
Yeah.
I'm seeing nodding of head.
Okay, great. I will stop the recording now then.
Great.
Or actually, I will pause it, okay?
Transition. And messy times of transition are always the times when one form of society, so the patriarchy, has outlived its time. The patriarchy is not sustainable. Climate crisis is caused by it, so it can't, the same system which has caused the problem can't solve it. So we are living right now in the painful interim phase between the patriarchy, which is resisting its own death, which is painful, and we don't know yet how the future will look like. But people like you who are here, you are the leaders who are working on building the next new system of society and culture. And what I would like to add as a last piece from my love for the human brain and neuroscience, I think we need to add to the discussion a strong focus on helping all of us, men and women, to overcome our fears. Because fear, be unconscious, not communicated, not brought to awareness, not healed fear, is the source of most of the problems. The fears around resources and scarcity was the birth of the patriarchy. The fear of strangers, of people not looking like ourselves, was the birth moment of racism. The fear about women's bodies and their power to give life and their sexual power was the birth of misogyny. So by focusing on building the new form of society and culture and healing our fears, I believe we can make the switch from fear to love and let love lead always.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sylvia. And this has become our motto: let love lead, always. And the always is very important, as we are seeing now in these days with all that is happening around the world. So thank you very much for this encouraging message. And now over to you, Chitra, for some closing remarks.
No, thank you so much. And I wanted to, first of all, just thank you for organizing this fantastic event, Marilena taking the lead. And it's really, yes, I see all the clapping. You took us from, the individual experiences, the very poignant experiences of Veronique and Wadzi, so that we could really humanize and find a concrete human example of what this means. What does bias mean, And then we went to the organizational level with Katja to explain how we can address it, and what are the policies that are there to protect us that may actually not have been there when we first joined, in fact, our organizations. And then Katie showing us how in our own work, the global vision of what we do, that how we can at a higher level in various ways, like in terms of land tenure, it's systemic, much of this bias. So you need to identify the experience, raise it to the organizational level, and then in our work at the global level, in the laws, we need to make these changes. And so I think it's fantastic that we've raised this awareness. We had this very frank discussion. And so I'm going to invite each of you, as Veronique said, it's 365 days of the year, to continue this dialogue with people at the lunch table, And I want to add to the word of love, inclusion. Let's include people. Let's be aware of our biases, because we are all biased, and let's be open to hearing people's experience and sharing and inviting this conversation in a space of confidentiality and trust. And I think by doing so, we'll become more aware of how other people experience the world and the discrimination or bias they experience, and maybe we can start making changes. And that can be, again, like invite somebody that you've never asked to lunch before, someone who's different from you, And then to the point of in our own hirings, like those of us who may be managing teams, let's think about the diversity. Let's make sure our team is diverse. We work for the UN. Let's ensure that we have people from different backgrounds, different sexes, not having, an all-female unit. If we have a lot of women, let's hire men. We need diversity and inclusion. So I think in our own lives, we can be the change we want to see, as always. And then I want to thank, we had some very sensitive topics about sexual harassment. And I think that's also a chapter in the WIN book, in fact, is addressed by one of our writers. And we hope to also organize a special meeting on that with technical experts to address that issue that is so important. So I want to just thank everyone. And I'm so proud of our WIN group, and I look around us and we are so diverse. We are women of every color, shape, size, and from all over the world. I know we have people joining from Africa, from North America, from, all over Europe. So thank you for joining us, and thanks for being part of WIN and making it so great. And we'll see those of you in Rome on Friday for drinks, I hope, so that we can finally meet face to face. So thanks so much, Marilena and everyone. So big applause.
Thank you, Chitra. Thank you in particular to our speakers, Veronique and Wadzi, for sharing your stories. Katja, for bringing up the organizational perspective and what's happening, and for encouraging us to come to see you, and Monde also. and Catherine, of course, for sharing the great work that IFAD is doing together with other organizations. And with this, I would like to close the meeting, thanking you all again for your active participation, and I look forward to continue the discussions. As we said, this was the first of a series of events, and yes, we will definitely have one on sexual harassment because it is featured in the book, unfortunately. And so the discussion is to be continued. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Marilena.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.